I was sitting in my dentist's waiting room, flipping through some magazine I wasn't even reading, when my phone rang. Ethan. My son. I picked up expecting the usual. Maybe he needed help with something, or just wanted to chat. But the voice on the other end? It was different. Cold. Like I was talking to someone from his office, not my own kid. Dad, we're moving tomorrow, he said. No, hello. No, how are you? Just straight to it. I sold your beach house and your pickup. We needed the money. Bye. And then he hung up. I sat there holding the phone, staring at the screen like it might somehow rewind the last 10 seconds. 48 years. 48 years of late-night fevers and scraped knees. Of teaching him to cast a fishing line off that same beach house dock. Of watching him open presents by the fireplace every Christmas morning. All of it, gone. Reduced to a 15-second phone call. The room started to tilt a little. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, though they probably weren't even looking. I thought I might lose it right there, just fall apart in front of the receptionist and the guy reading Golf Digest across from me. But I didn't. Instead, I smiled. Because Ethan had no idea. He had no clue what his mother and I had set up years ago, long before the cancer took her. Sometimes love isn't the loud kind. Sometimes it just waits in the shadows, quiet and patient. Before I tell you what happened next, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Trust me, you'll want to see how this one ends. My name is Thomas Hale. I'm 72, and I spent most of my life standing in front of teenagers trying to make the Revolutionary War sound interesting. Small public high school in Wilmington, North Carolina. Nothing glamorous. But it was honest work, and it paid enough. That beach house Ethan just sold out from under me? It wasn't just some investment property. It was everything. Margaret and I built that place when Ethan was 15. And I don't mean we hired contractors and picked out tile samples, I mean we built it. Saved every single dollar for years. Skipped vacations. Took on extra tutoring gigs at night. All so we could own a tiny piece of the ocean. It wasn't much. 2 bedrooms. A porch that faced east so you could watch the sun come up. And this patch of dune grass out front that turned this unbelievable golden color at sunset. Margaret used to say it looked like God was showing off. That house held everything that mattered. Summer mornings teaching Ethan to fish. Christmas Eves with the whole place smelling like cinnamon and pine. Margaret humming while she cooked, her hair tied back with that old red ribbon she refused to throw away. Margaret. God, she was the glue. You know those people who don't need to raise their voice to make you listen? That was her. Steady. Calm. Could stop a room full of chaos with just a look. When she died 7 months ago, right there at the kitchen table, mid-sip of her morning coffee, it felt like someone had turned off the sound in my life. Everything just went quiet. That morning, she'd smiled at me. Tucked a piece of gray hair behind her ear the way she always did. And she said, "Promise me, Tom. Whatever happens, trust your gut. And when it feels right, open the envelope." I didn't think much of it at the time. We'd been dealing with her illness for months, and I figured she meant some old letters or maybe her grandmother's recipes, something sentimental she wanted me to find later. So I tucked the envelope in the back of her dresser drawer and tried not to think about it. After the funeral, Ethan started coming around more. A lot more. He helped me sort through Margaret's things, took over the bills, even made my doctor's appointments for me. I kept telling people how lucky I was, how proud I was to have a son who cared so much. When the grief hit hard, he'd squeeze my shoulder and say, "Don't worry, Dad. I've got everything under control." And for a while, I believed him. But then things started to shift. He began bringing Clara around, his wife. She's a real estate agent. Always dressed like she's about to close a deal. Expensive perfume. The kind of woman who walks into a room and immediately starts calculating square footage. I'd catch her staring at the crown molding in my living room like she was running comps in her head. One afternoon, she sat across from me at the kitchen table, sipping tea with her perfectly manicured nails wrapped around the mug. She said, Mr. Hale, beachfront properties are peaking right now. You could sell that house for a small fortune. At your age, wouldn't it be smarter to have that money liquid? Less to worry about. Ethan didn't even look at me. He just nodded. Like it was already decided. I laughed it off. Tried to anyway. That house isn't just wood and paint, Clara. It's 40 years of our lives. Your mother-in-law planted every single flower in that garden with her own hands. She smiled. One of those polite, patient smiles that doesn't reach the eyes. And I saw it then, the impatience flickering underneath. That's when I felt it for the first time. This cold little knot in my chest. The sense that love had turned into something else. Something transactional. I kept trying to give them the benefit of the doubt. They were young. Ambitious. Maybe they just saw money differently than Margaret and I did. But then they started asking me to sign things. Routine paperwork. They called it. Insurance forms. Property tax stuff. Every time, that knot got tighter. And Margaret's voice would float up in my memory, "Trust your gut, Tom." The last time I saw Ethan before that phone call, he hugged me at the door. Barely. Like he was already halfway to the car. He said, "You should rest more, Dad. Let us handle the tough stuff." Then he walked out with a stack of my folders tucked under his arm. 2 weeks later, I got that call in the dentist's office. I drove home in complete silence afterward. Didn't turn on the radio. Didn't stop for coffee. Just gripped the wheel and stared at the road. When I walked through the door, the house felt enormous. Too quiet. Margaret's teacup was still sitting on the shelf, the one with the little chip on the rim she refused to replace. I ran my hand along the dining table we'd sanded together one summer, back when our hands were stronger and our dreams felt possible. And then I remembered. The envelope. Margaret had left it for this. Somehow, in that uncanny way she'd known. She'd known there would come a day when memories wouldn't be enough. I walked into the bedroom, opened the top drawer of her dresser, and pulled out a small blue envelope. Sealed with wax. Her handwriting on the front, delicate and slanted. "For when you're ready." I stood there holding it for a long time. My hands were shaking, not from fear, exactly. More like the weight of everything she trusted me with, everything I'd ignored because I didn't want to believe I'd need it. Outside, the ocean was loud. Louder than usual. Like it was pushing me to open the damn thing. The waves had always been Margaret's favorite sound. She said they steadied her when nothing else could. I tore the seal carefully and unfolded the papers inside. And everything stopped. Because what Margaret had left me wasn't just a letter. It was a plan. A quiet, brilliant, unshakable plan. And Ethan had no idea it existed. Inside were several folded documents, a small brass key, and a letter in Margaret's handwriting. God, that handwriting. Neat and careful, the kind you don't see anymore. Every loop deliberate. Every word placed just so. I unfolded the letter with shaking hands. "My dearest Tom, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer beside you. Please don't grieve more than you already have. I know how much you love that house by the water. It holds every piece of who we were. But I also know our son. And I know his weakness, the one we always hoped he'd outgrow." I had to stop. Just for a second. Margaret had always been so gentle when it came to Ethan, even when he let us down. Seeing it written out like this, seeing her acknowledge what we both knew but never said, it hit different. The letter went on. "Years ago, I invested the savings we never touched. The emergency fund you insisted we keep. I used my name to buy a few small rental properties, and later, a stake in the office building where Ethan works. Everything is under a company I set up quietly, MH Trust Holdings. When the time comes, ownership transfers entirely to you. You'll find the documents in this envelope. Use them wisely, not for revenge, but for protection. Love him, but let him face the storm he creates." I had to sit down. Actually sit down on the edge of the bed because my legs weren't working right. My wife, this woman who hummed while she folded laundry, who made apple pies every October without fail, had quietly built a financial fortress around us. And she never said a word. I spread everything out on the bed. Property deeds for 3 rental cottages in town. Ownership certificates for an office complex downtown. Bank accounts I'd never heard of. And a typed summary, signed by a lawyer named Alan Patterson. Patterson. I remembered him vaguely. Older guy, maybe 60s. Came to the funeral. Shook my hand and told me to call if I ever needed clarity on her affairs. At the time, I thought it was just something people say. My hands were still shaking when I picked up the phone. Mr. Patterson? A pause. Then a calm, warm voice. Mr. Hale. It's good to hear from you. I was wondering when I might get your call. How did you? She told me you'd reach out eventually. She said it would be when you were ready. Not before. I told him everything. Ethan's phone call. The beach house. The truck. The way he'd said goodbye like I was a bill he just paid off. Patterson listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, Mr. Hale, your wife was one of the sharpest clients I've ever worked with. She prepared for every scenario, including this one. The trust she built legally secures all those assets in your name. Ethan has no rights to them. None. And the sale of the beach house? That was fraudulent. He had no legal authority to sell it. Fraudulent. The word landed heavy. I'd always thought the worst Ethan could do was disappoint me. I never imagined he'd cross into something criminal. If you want, Patterson continued, I can start the process to reverse the transaction. The buyer gets refunded, the property comes back to you. It'll take some paperwork, but it's straightforward. The real question is, do you want to go after him? I stared at the photograph on the nightstand. Margaret in her summer dress, squinting into the sun, laughing at something I'd said. I could almost hear her voice. No, I said quietly. I don't want to destroy him. I want him to understand what he's done. Margaret wouldn't want me to hate our son. She'd want me to teach him. Patterson let out a long breath. The kind that carries weight. Then you're exactly the man she always said you were. After I hung up, I just sat there. The ocean outside kept doing its thing, steady, patient, relentless. Each wave sounded like a heartbeat. I folded Margaret's letter back into the envelope and slipped it into my jacket pocket. For the first time since she died, I didn't feel her absence like a wound. I felt her presence like a map. Over the next few days, I went through every document. Slowly. Carefully. And that's when I found it, the detail that almost made me laugh out loud. The MH Trust owned the apartment building where Ethan and Clara lived. The same apartment they'd been living in rent-free for 2 years. My son had sold my house out from under me while living in a building his dead mother owned. I decided to visit Patterson's office. It was downtown in one of those old brick buildings with big windows and wooden floors that creaked when you walked. He welcomed me like we were old friends, spread the documents across his mahogany desk, and adjusted his glasses. Your wife left you in a very strong position, Mr. Hale, he said. These properties are all paid off. The trust generates enough rental income to support you comfortably for the rest of your life. And like I said, reversing the sale of your beach house will be simple. What Ethan and Clara did was illegal. Will they go to jail for it? I asked. He looked at me over his glasses. Not unless you press charges. My professional advice? Don't. Sometimes silence teaches louder than punishment. That line stuck with me. Silence teaches louder than punishment. I left his office as the sun was setting. Drove down to the beach and parked by the dunes. The sky was burning orange over the water. Margaret used to say the ocean had a memory, that it carried every secret back to shore eventually. I sat there watching the horizon until stars started poking through the dark. Ethan thought he'd taken everything from me. He had no idea that the ground he was standing on still belonged to his mother. And to me. I whispered into the wind. You were right, Margaret. Love isn't blind. It just waits for the right moment to open its eyes. And right then, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I woke up before sunrise the next morning. The air smelled like salt and wet sand, and I could hear the ocean through the window I'd left cracked open. Margaret loved this time of day, the calm before everything started moving, when the world felt like it was still deciding what kind of day it wanted to be. But I wasn't calm. I wasn't angry either, not really. It was something else. Something colder and steadier. Like resolve, but with teeth. I made a pot of coffee, black, the way I've always taken it, and sat down at the kitchen table with an old legal pad. My teacher handwriting came back without thinking. Neat. Patient. Line by line, I wrote out every step: reversal of fraudulent sale, consultation with Patterson, recovery of assets, silence until the time is right. At 8 o'clock sharp, I called him. He picked up on the first ring. Mr. Hale. I've already started the paperwork. The buyer of your beach house has been notified. Thankfully, they're reasonable people. Once they learned your son didn't actually have legal ownership, they agreed to a full refund. So the house comes back to me? Within 2 weeks. The title will be restored in your name. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Good. And the truck? That's going to take a little more work. Your son transferred the title using a power of attorney. I'm investigating whether it was valid. If it was signed under deception, we'll have grounds to reclaim it. I stared out the window at the empty spot where that old green pickup used to sit. Faded paint, dented bumper, but I washed it every Sunday like clockwork. Margaret used to tease me that the truck was my second love. Maybe she wasn't wrong. Do whatever you have to do, I said. But no police. No scandal. I don't want Ethan dragged through the mud. Not yet. Patterson paused. Understood. We'll keep it quiet. Yes. Quiet. That afternoon, I walked down to the beach house. It looked the same from the outside, cream-colored walls, that porch swing creaking in the wind, but it felt different. Strangers had walked through it. Judged it. Put a dollar sign on things that didn't have a price. I stood by the gate, listening to the waves and the gulls, and I remembered Margaret out there painting the porch while Ethan ran around with a kite. He couldn't have been older than 10. He kept saying he'd never sell the house, that he wanted to grow old here. Kids mean it when they say things like that. Life twists them later. A car horn snapped me out of it. Across the street, a moving truck pulled into the driveway. A couple got out, young, probably newlyweds. The guy spotted me and hesitated, then walked over. Mr. Hale? Yeah. I'm really sorry about all this. We didn't know. The realtor told us your son had full rights to sell. I believe you, I said, and I meant it. You'll get your money back soon. The law's on your side. He looked relieved. We didn't want any trouble. We really loved the house. So did I. I turned and walked away. Every step felt like I was taking something back. Over the next few days, Patterson handled everything. He was good at his job, discreet, efficient, respectful of Margaret's memory. Every evening, he'd call with an update, and every time, I could feel her hand in it. Guiding. Protecting. The sale is officially void, he said one night. You'll receive new title deeds next week. I've also started transferring control of the rental properties directly into your name, not just through the trust. That includes the building your son and his wife live in. The apartment complex? Yes, sir. Technically, you've always owned it through the MH Trust. We're just making it official now. I almost laughed. So I'm my son's landlord. In a sense, yes. Then we'll let the rent come due when he gets back from Europe. A few weeks later, I got a postcard from Paris. Glossy picture of the Eiffel Tower on the front. Ethan's messy handwriting on the back. Dad, hope you're okay. Clara and I are finally making moves here. Big investment opportunity coming. Sorry for the rush back home, but it'll pay off soon. We'll call when things settle. E. The postmark looked smug. Like he'd won something. I set it on the mantel next to Margaret's urn. You hear that, love? I whispered. Your boy thinks he's a businessman now. But I already knew where this was headed. Ethan's investment opportunities were always the same: big talk, no foundation. He'd been chasing shortcuts his whole life. Margaret used to say he got my stubbornness but not my patience. One evening, my neighbor Helen knocked on the door with a casserole. She's lived across the street for 40 years, retired nurse, doesn't miss a thing. I heard about Ethan, she said, setting the dish on the counter. People talk, you know. I figured they would. She crossed her arms and looked at me. You doing okay? You don't look angry. I'm not. I'm thinking. About what? About how silence works better than shouting. Helen smiled. You sound just like Margaret. She always said storms make people listen who ignored the breeze. She was right. That night, I sat in my armchair by the window and watched the lights along the shoreline blink on one by one. For the first time since that phone call, I felt something close to peace. Ethan thought he'd stripped me bare. But while he was out there chasing easy money, his mother's plan was unfolding. Every document signed. Every house restored. Every legal knot tightening around his carelessness. I wasn't planning revenge. I was setting the stage for a lesson money can't buy. Before bed, I wrote one last thing in my journal. Margaret, I'm doing it your way. No shouting. No anger. Just truth in motion. The sea doesn't punish, it reclaims. And soon, it'll reclaim our son too. I closed the book, set it on the nightstand, turned off the lamp. Outside, the tide was coming in. Justice doesn't need to knock. It just waits for the right wave. 3 weeks went by without a word from Ethan. That postcard from Paris still sat on the mantel next to Margaret's urn. I'd catch myself looking at it sometimes, not out of anger, but this weird curiosity. Like I was waiting to see how long it would take for the wind he was chasing to blow him back home. Patterson called one Monday morning while I was out trimming the hedges. I could hear it in his voice right away, that careful, cautious tone, but with something underneath. Amusement, maybe? Mr. Hale, he said. I believe the storm's begun. What kind of storm? The financial kind. Your son's name has popped up on several unpaid loan applications. Large ones. Apparently, he and his wife took out private loans overseas to fund some investment project that doesn't exist. I wiped my hands on my jeans and leaned against the fence. So it started. Yes. One of the lenders reached out to verify his assets, the beach house, the truck, the apartment building. All properties that now legally belong to you. Once they realized he doesn't actually own any of it, the deals fell apart. He's facing serious default penalties. Let them handle it, I said. I've got no part in that anymore. There was a pause on the line. Then Patterson's voice softened. Margaret would be proud of how you're handling this. I nodded even though he couldn't see me. She was always the wise one. That evening, Helen showed up again with banana bread and the latest neighborhood intel. She always knew more than the evening news. You might want to sit down for this, she said, setting the bread on the counter. Claire's back in the States. I blinked. Already? She flew home alone last week. Word is she's staying with her sister in Raleigh. And Ethan? Helen shrugged. Nobody's seen him. I didn't say anything. Just poured us both coffee and sat down across from her. She stirred in a spoonful of sugar and said quietly, I don't like seeing families fall apart, Tom. But sometimes the lessons we refuse to teach, life teaches for us. I smiled a little. Maybe that's how grace works. 2 days later, the silence broke. My phone rang just after sunset. International number. I knew before I even answered. Dad, Ethan said. His voice sounded small. Strained. It's me. I know. He hesitated. Things didn't go as planned. The deal fell through. The investor pulled out, and Clara, she left. She said she's not coming back? I see. I'm trying to figure things out, but everything's complicated. My accounts are frozen, and the bank says I'm under investigation for some irregularities. They're lying, Dad, I didn't forge anything. Clara handled all the papers. I didn't argue. There's no point in challenging someone mid-desperation. The truth would do a better job than I ever could. Ethan, I said quietly, come home when you can. We'll talk then. He let out this huge breath, misreading my calm for forgiveness. Thanks, Dad. I knew I could count on you. 2 weeks later, he landed back in North Carolina. By then, the newspapers were already sniffing around, whispering about real estate fraud and unpaid debts under his name. I saw the exhaustion on his face before he even opened his mouth. Eyes sunken. Shoulders slumped. He didn't hug me. Just stood in the doorway with a suitcase in his hand and said, Dad, I messed up. For a long moment, I just looked at him. Not the arrogant man who sold my house, but the kid who used to ask me how to skip rocks across the water. Come in, I said. You look hungry. He followed me to the kitchen, moving slow and uncertain. I set a plate of warm stew in front of him, and he ate without saying a word. The spoon clinking against the bowl was the only sound, like a metronome marking his guilt. When he finished, I asked softly, Where's Clara? He swallowed hard. Gone. Took what little we had left. I think she's filing for divorce. And your investments? He shook his head. There was never any investment. The guy we partnered with disappeared after taking the deposits. I trusted the wrong people. I folded my hands on the table. And you sold your family's home to fund it. He looked up, shame all over his face. I thought I was helping us, Dad. I thought I could double the money and surprise you, give you back more than I took. You didn't need to give me anything, I said quietly. You just needed to remember what couldn't be bought. His gaze dropped again. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I didn't answer. I wanted him to sit with those words. To feel the weight. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan turning in slow circles. Ethan was asleep in his old room down the hall, the same one Margaret had painted sky blue when he was a boy. I could almost hear her voice whispering beside me, Don't break him, Tom. Teach him. So that's what I decided to do. The next morning, I called Patterson. Start the process, I said. For what, sir? To formalize the reversal of every fraudulent asset. Keep my name quiet, but make it clear the sales can't stand. Let the buyers be refunded, but leave Ethan out of the details. I want him to feel the loss before the truth comes. Patterson paused. You're certain? Completely. He sighed. You have your wife's patience, Mr. Hale. Or her stubbornness, I said with a faint smile. A week later, Helen brought more news. Her cousin at the bank told her Ethan's accounts were officially frozen and the local papers were starting to sniff around for a story. They'll publish soon, she said. Everyone's whispering about how your son's empire collapsed overnight. Empires built on sand always do. That evening, I stood on the porch watching the sun melt into the water. For the first time since that phone call in the dentist's office, I didn't feel anger. I felt pity, not for what Ethan lost, but for how long it took him to realize what actually mattered. Margaret's voice seemed to echo in the waves. You can't teach love with comfort, Tom. Sometimes you have to let the storm do the teaching. And I whispered back. He's learning, love. Slowly, painfully, but he's learning. The next day, I got a letter from Patterson confirming everything was complete. The house was mine again. The apartment building officially under my control. The trust untouched. Ethan knew none of it. He thought we'd both lost everything. It was a strange balance, watching justice unfold silently, without gloating or hatred. I'd chosen Margaret's way. Quiet correction, not public punishment. And soon, when the time was right, my son would discover that the father he betrayed had never been the victim at all. The morning Ethan came home for good, the sky hung low and gray over the coast. Not storming, but you could feel it, that quiet heaviness in the air right before something breaks. I heard the door creak open before I saw him. He looked smaller somehow. Thinner. Hair a mess, shirt wrinkled from days of travel. The confident son who used to talk in business jargon and big promises now looked like a man barely holding himself together. "Dad," he said, his voice barely there. Can I stay here for a while?" I didn't ask how long. A while meant. "Of course. Your old room's still there." He nodded, eyes wet with exhaustion, and carried a single duffel bag down the hallway, the same hallway where his laughter used to bounce off the walls when he was little. Watching him disappear into that blue-painted room felt like time folding in on itself. The first week was mostly silence. He ate quietly, worked in the yard a bit, spent long hours sitting on the porch just staring at the ocean. Sometimes I'd catch him holding his phone, thumb hovering over the screen like he wanted to call someone, then he'd set it back down. One afternoon, I brought him a cup of coffee and sat beside him. He didn't look up. "You must hate me." "I don't hate you," I said. "Hate's easy. Disappointment takes more work." He flinched. Then nodded. "That's fair." For a long moment, the only sound was the waves in the distance. "Dad, I can't believe how fast everything went wrong," he said finally. "One week we were planning meetings in Paris. The next, the money was gone, the investors vanished, and Clara." He stopped, his throat tightening. "She said I ruined her life? And what do you think?" He stared at the horizon. "I think she's right." A few days later, I noticed he'd started waking up early, not for work, but to walk the beach alone. He'd come back covered in sand and sweat, sit at the kitchen table, and scroll through job listings on my old laptop. I pretended not to notice, but I did. Then one morning he asked, "Do you know anyone hiring?" "Anything. I don't care what kind of work." "You're not too proud for manual labor now?" I teased gently. He gave a tired smile. "I don't have the luxury to be proud anymore." That afternoon, I made a few calls. An old friend from my teaching days, now managing an auto shop, agreed to take him on part-time cleaning and organizing the garage. Minimum wage. Long hours. When I told Ethan, he said, "I'll take it." No hesitation. His first day back in the working world, he came home with grease on his hands and sweat on his collar. He looked exhausted, but there was something new in his eyes. Something steady. Grounded. "How was it?" I asked. He laughed, bitter but real. "Humbling. The manager's younger than me, and he talks like I used to. Full of plans and shortcuts. I wanted to tell him to slow down before life does it for him. Maybe one day you will." He smirked, then went to take a shower. I stayed at the table long after he'd gone, my chest heavy with this weird mix of pride and sadness. A few evenings later, Helen came over with peach cobbler and her usual sharp observations. "Your boy's been working at Mason's Auto, hasn't he?" she asked. I nodded. "Third week now. I saw him carrying boxes the other day, didn't even look up when I said hello. You've got him sweating for the first time in his life." "It's not me," I said. "It's life teaching him what I couldn't." Helen smiled softly. "Margaret would be proud of you, Tom. Of both of you." I looked out toward the ocean. "I hope so." Ethan's transformation was slow but visible. He started cooking dinners. Fixed the fence. Even mowed Helen's lawn without being asked. He never brought up money again. Once I overheard him on the phone with a debt collector, explaining calmly that he couldn't pay yet but would, eventually. No panic in his voice. Just acceptance. One night after dinner, he sat across from me and said, "Dad, I've been doing some thinking." "That's always a dangerous start," I joked. He smiled a little. "I keep trying to figure out where I went wrong. I wanted more for us, for me, for Clara. But somewhere along the way, I started believing I deserved more just because I wanted it. I thought love was about proving myself through success." I didn't interrupt. "When Mom died, something in me broke," he continued. "I told myself I was helping you by selling the house. But if I'm honest, I just couldn't stand seeing everything she touched. It reminded me that I'd never be like her, careful, steady, content." I looked at him for a long moment, letting the quiet hold us. Son, you don't need to be like your mother. You just need to be someone she'd recognize. He swallowed hard, tears in his eyes. I miss her. I do too. The next morning, Ethan left early for work. When I went into the kitchen, I found a small folded note on the counter. Dad, I know I've let you down more times than I can count. But thank you for letting me stay. I'm not the same man who made that phone call. I don't expect forgiveness yet. I just hope one day you'll see me as your son again. I sat there for a long time, reading that note over and over. Forgiveness doesn't come from words. It comes from watching someone rebuild themselves brick by brick. A month later, Patterson called. Mr. Hale, he said, everything's finalized. You now have full control of all assets. The beach house, the trust, the apartment complex, entirely under your authority. You can decide what happens next. And Ethan? He's legally free from the fraudulent sale, but unaware of any reversals. He thinks everything's lost. Good, I said. Let's keep it that way for now. Patterson hesitated. You really believe he's ready for the truth? Not yet. He's still learning what real value looks like. That night, Ethan came home from the garage smelling like oil and sweat and collapsed onto the couch. I handed him a glass of water. He looked at me and said quietly, Dad, do you ever think people can truly change? Yes, I said. But not because they want to, because they have to. He nodded slowly, the words sinking in. Then I think I'm finally changing. Good. Keep going. As he drifted off to sleep, I looked toward Margaret's picture on the mantel. Her eyes seemed to glimmer even in the dim light. He's coming back to us, I whispered. Not the way he left, but better. Outside, the waves rolled steady against the shore. The same tide that had carried my son away was now bringing him home, grain by grain. And I knew the time was close. The time to reveal what he never saw coming. It was early March when the moment finally arrived. The air was crisp, carrying that mix of salt and wood smoke you only get near the coast. Ethan had been living with me for nearly 4 months by then, working steady hours at the auto shop and coming home each evening with tired hands and this quiet gratitude he'd never had before. I'd watched him rebuild himself piece by piece. What he didn't know was that I'd been rebuilding things too, quietly, in the background, with Patterson's help. The papers were signed. The accounts were secure. Every property Margaret had left was back in safe hands. Now there was only one thing left to do. That morning, I found Ethan in the living room polishing his work boots. I stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching him. There was something different about the way he moved now. Slower. More careful. Like life had finally taught him the value of stillness. Ethan, I said, I need you to come with me today. He looked up, confused. Where to? The bank. His brow furrowed. The bank? Dad, I don't have anything left there. I know, I said softly. But your mother does. He froze. The cloth slipped from his fingers. Mom? Yes. There's something she left for us. Something I think it's time you saw. He didn't ask questions after that. Just nodded, grabbed his jacket, and followed me out to the truck. My old green pickup that Patterson had managed to recover quietly a few weeks earlier. Ethan noticed it but didn't say a word. Maybe he was afraid to ask how I got it back. The drive was silent. Just the low hum of the engine and the distant rhythm of the waves. When we reached the bank, I walked up to the counter and handed the clerk a small brass key, the same one Margaret had left inside her envelope months ago. The woman checked the records, then smiled politely. This way, Mr. Hale. We followed her into a small, quiet room with a heavy door and polished walls. She unlocked a safety deposit box, then stepped out, leaving us alone. Inside were several papers, a velvet pouch, and a sealed envelope addressed in Margaret's handwriting. For Tom and Ethan, together. Ethan's breath caught. His hands trembled as he lifted the letter. Go on, I said gently. Read it. He broke the seal and unfolded the paper. His voice shook as he began. My dearest Tom and Ethan, If you're reading this together, then I can rest easy knowing life has brought you both to this moment. I loved you both more than words ever could, but I also knew love alone wouldn't be enough to keep you safe from the mistakes we make when we confuse money with meaning. Ethan paused, blinking back tears. I placed a hand on his shoulder. Ethan, the letter continued, I left your father everything, not because I didn't trust you, but because I wanted to protect you from your own ambition. You always wanted to build empires, but you forgot that the strongest empires are built on honesty. I hope that someday, when life had softened you, you'd understand that wealth isn't measured in what you own, but in what you honor. He stopped reading. His hands were shaking too much. I took the letter and finished it for him. Tom, when the time feels right, tell our son the truth. The properties, the investments, the trust, they were never just for you. They were for him too, when he's ready to handle them with humility. If he's sitting beside you now, it means he's learning that lesson. You'll know when to give him his share. Love doesn't punish. It prepares. Margaret. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back into the envelope. For a long time, Ethan said nothing. His shoulders trembled, and he covered his face with his hands. Dad? His voice cracked. She knew everything, didn't she? She knew I'd fail. She didn't see it as failure, I said quietly. She saw it as growing pains. He lowered his hands, eyes red and glassy. All those years, she never said a word. And he stopped himself, shaking his head. I sold the house she loved most. Yes, I said. But you didn't sell her love. That's something you can't lose. He let out this weak, broken laugh. I don't deserve any of this. Maybe not, I replied. But you've earned the chance to become someone who does. I reached into the box and pulled out the pouch. Inside were 2 rings, Margaret's wedding band and the simple gold band I'd lost years ago while repairing the porch. She must have found it and kept it safe all this time. I handed them to Ethan. She wanted you to have these. He took them carefully, holding them in his palm like they might shatter. Then I handed him another envelope, this one sealed by Patterson. And this is from me. He hesitated. What is it? Your second chance. He opened it slowly and froze when he saw the documents inside, deeds, trust papers, legal forms bearing both our names. These properties are in my name? He asked, his voice trembling. In ours, I corrected. Your mother wanted us to rebuild this family together. Half of everything now belongs to you, not to own, but to protect. You'll manage them under my guidance until I'm gone. After that, they're yours to keep or to pass on. Ethan stared at me, disbelief giving way to tears. Why would you do this after what I did to you? Because that's what she wanted. And because I'm your father. My job isn't to punish you. It's to make sure you learn what love really costs. He covered his face again, shoulders shaking. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw. I'll never sell another thing that holds meaning, he said. Not for any price. I smiled softly. Then your mother's lesson worked. As we left the bank, the sunlight hit the glass doors, casting this golden glow over the marble floor. For the first time in years, I saw peace in my son's face, not the peace of comfort, but the peace of understanding. We walked to the truck in silence, but before I started the engine, Ethan turned to me. Dad, he said, voice steady, I think I finally get it. Get what? What Mom meant by wealth. I looked at him, waiting. He smiled faintly. It's not about what you own. It's about who you can face when everything else is gone. I nodded, starting the engine. Then you're richer than you've ever been, son. Spring turned to summer before we even realized it. The days stretched longer, the air got warmer, and for the first time in years, the house didn't feel haunted by silence. There was laughter again. Gentle, steady, healing laughter. Ethan started helping me with small repairs around the property, just like when he was a kid. Some days we worked side by side on the old truck. Other days we walked along the beach, our footsteps sinking into the same sand that used to carry Margaret's bare prints. One evening, As we sat on the porch watching the sunset turn the horizon gold, Ethan said quietly, "Dad, I want to rebuild Mom's garden by the beach house. The one with the white roses and sea lavender." I nodded. "She'd like that." He looked down at his hands, calloused now, cracked but steady. "I don't deserve this peace," he said, "but I'm grateful for it every day." I smiled faintly. "Deserving isn't what peace is about, son. It's about what you do once you find it." He nodded, taking in the words like he used to take in my lessons at the dinner table when he was young. That summer, we began restoring the beach house together. The porch had weathered years of wind and salt, but the foundation was still strong, just like the memory of the woman who built it. When we pulled up the old boards, we found a small tin box wedged beneath the steps. Inside was a faded photograph of Margaret standing by the railing, her hand resting on Ethan's shoulder. Written on the back, in her careful handwriting, were 4 words. "Home is never sold." Ethan stared at that photograph for a long time. His eyes glistened, and for a moment he couldn't speak. Finally, he whispered, "She knew, didn't she?" "She always did." The restoration took months. Every nail we hammered felt like stitching something torn back together. The neighbors would pass by, waving, sometimes helping paint or carry supplies. Even Helen showed up with sweet tea and advice neither of us asked for but both secretly needed. One afternoon, as we were putting the finishing touches on the porch, Helen leaned on the railing and said, "You two turned grief into something beautiful. Not many folks get a second chance like this." Ethan smiled at her. "We're not just rebuilding a house, Helen. We're rebuilding who we are." She grinned. "Well, you better hurry up before the tide comes in, philosopher." We all laughed, and for the first time, it didn't feel forced. It felt right. A few weeks later, we hosted a small gathering for the community. Nothing fancy. Just neighbors, a few old students of mine, and folks from the auto shop where Ethan still worked. He insisted on grilling while I set up chairs on the porch. When everyone arrived, I stood on the steps, holding a photo of Margaret in her favorite summer dress. "This house," I began, "was built with love, nearly lost to greed, and now restored by grace. My wife always believed that love doesn't die, it just waits for us to be ready to recognize it again. So today, we're dedicating this home not just to her memory, but to something bigger." Ethan stepped beside me, taking a deep breath. "From now on," he said, "this place will be open to those who need it most. Veterans, widows, single parents, anyone who's lost their footing. We'll call it the Margaret House." The crowd applauded softly, some wiping tears. Helen nodded approvingly. "That's how you honor someone," she whispered. In the months that followed, the Margaret House became more than just a name, it became a living thing. Every week, someone new would stop by. A veteran struggling to adjust. A widow who'd lost her home. A family looking for peace. Ethan worked weekends organizing small community drives, while I handled the paperwork and logistics. The local paper ran a story titled, "From Betrayal to Blessing, Father and Son Restore Hope by the Sea." I clipped that article and framed it next to Margaret's photograph. She looked proud in that photo, like she already knew how the story would end. One night, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan and I sat outside again, a soft ocean breeze moving through the air. The porch lights flickered warm against the twilight. He turned to me and said, "Dad, when I made that phone call, the one where I told you I sold the house, I thought I was in control. I thought I was saving us. I didn't realize I was the one who needed saving." I looked out at the water. "You were never beyond saving, son. You just needed to lose everything to see what mattered." He was quiet for a long time, then asked, "Do you ever think Mom planned all this?" I chuckled. "Your mother didn't just plan. She foresaw. She trusted that love, left alone long enough, would fix what pride broke." He smiled softly. "Then I guess she was right again." As the waves rolled in and the stars began to appear, I felt something settle deep inside me, a calm I hadn't felt since Margaret's passing. I looked over at Ethan, now a man remade by consequence and forgiveness, and said quietly, You know, I used to think justice was about balance, righting wrongs, setting things straight. But now I think justice is just love, corrected. He nodded. And forgiveness? That's love remembered. We sat in silence after that, watching the tide creep closer to the shore. Before heading inside, Ethan turned and said, Dad? Yes? Thank you for not giving up on me. I smiled. That's a father's job, son. To keep the light on, so when you're ready to come home, you can still find your way. He nodded, eyes shimmering. And as we closed the door behind us, I could almost hear Margaret's voice in the wind, soft, proud, and full of peace. Home is never sold. If this story touched your heart, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon for more stories where love redeems, truth prevails, and family always finds its way home.